three things with you guys this morning. I want to tell you a little bit about why I teach what I teach. And then I want to give you a very, very condensed version of what the first few minutes of the class that I co-teach on fashion and globalization might be like. Like all good professors, I have 4 hours of notes for 10 minutes of talking, so we'll see how far we get. So a lot of times people think that I teach about fashion because I really like pretty clothes. This is a representation of someone I think we can accurately say really liked pretty clothes. But in fact, my interest in fashion started from living and working in this neighborhood. And as some of you guys may know, but as many of you may not know, the neighborhood in which we're sitting right now was, at the turn of the last century, the garment-producing industry, center of the garment-producing industry in New York City. This is a picture of a factory that we're going to talk about in a second that's right on the eastern corner of Washington Square Park, so sort of right behind where we are right now. It's also the place that you could argue that the US labor movement first galvanized or began to galvanize. In 1909, there was a spontaneous walkout by 400 people who were working in this garment factory, and it was called the Uprising of 20,000. Since you guys introduced yourself, that was like a sly way to get you to be willing to do some audience participation. So let me show you two pictures. Look at this one, and then look at this one. What do you guys notice about these people? In addition to their love of hats. They're all women, okay? Great. What else? Yeah, hey, how's it going?
They have long skirts.
They have long skirts, okay. What age are they? How old do you think they are?
16?
Yeah, super young, right? And is there anything you notice about this picture that might indicate what community they come from? Yeah.
There's Hebrew in the back.
Yeah, right? So this uprising of 20,000, right, which galvanized the labor union movement in the United States, was started by very young immigrant women, mostly Jewish and Italian women, right from this neighborhood. I don't want to dwell on this too long, but these same women, same group of women, also some of them tragically died in a fire in the Triangle Shirtwaist factory. And this is a picture of a worker in 1961 erecting a plaque to these women. And two things followed from this. The fact that these same group of women then died in this workplace disaster that might have been preventable had their striking demands been met, ended up being the thing that really provides us with many of the kinds of safety and protection that we still enjoy. Okay? So all of which is to say that I like pretty clothes fine, but the reason that I do what I do is because I'm interested in the social and cultural and economic history that can be found in the study of fashion. Okay. So this interest in the history of the global garment making industry led to an interest in the contemporary one. And so I started to research on the subject and write for the New Yorker on this subject. And I also started to teach a class. I co-teach a class on fashion and globalization with a colleague in social and cultural analysis whose name is Thuy Linh Tu. And what I wanted to do now is to just do the first couple of minutes of what we might do in our class together. We might start by looking at this chart. This chart, I just saw your face go like, ah, right? Can you talk to the person who you just introduced yourself to about what you notice about this chart, which is a diagram of how the production part of making clothing currently works? 2 minutes with your neighbor about what you notice. All right, that might not have been properly 2 minutes. That might have been like 30 seconds. But for the sake of time, does anyone want to tell me just something that you notice about what you see here. Just something that you observe. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's not even the first day of college. It's like the first day before the first day of college. Yeah?
There are a lot more parts that are included in the system of creating, like just products of general materials.
Totally, right? That we see all the different kinds of processes that go into making a single piece of clothing, right? Beautiful, right? That's a beautiful place to start. Anybody else have something that they want to say, something that they noticed? Okay, so I think that's an amazing place to start. And maybe the second thing that we start to realize is that behind each one of these dots, which are drawn as if they were the same size, are millions and millions and millions of people, right? Does anybody know where the most amount of people who work in this industry can be found on this chart? Anybody know the answer to this? Well, altogether, there's something like 60 to 75 million people who are represented here, right? It's a lot of people. The fuzzy numbers have to do with the fact that a lot of this form of production is informal, right? So it's actually hard to count who's participating. But this one over here, cut, make, and trim, cut, make, and assemble, right, represents something like 15 million people, right? People who are actually sewing and making the clothes. Okay? All right. So yet, for a surprisingly long time, if you were studying fashion in a kind of regular way, it all consolidated around one other nodal point, and this is product design and development, right? Okay. So in other words, like all the millions and millions and millions of people represented here disappeared, and instead it was as if fashion were just made by fashion designers, right? Anybody know who this is? Yeah, right? What about this guy? Right? So it's so interesting that we know who these people are, right? But if I showed you a picture of the cut, make, and trim, the 15 million people who do cut, make, and trim, right, we would have no idea who they are. All right, I'm going to go back to Chanel because Carl looks so jaunty in that picture. Just give you a break from him for a second. Can we talk for a second about what follows from looking at the chart like this as opposed to like this? Right? What gets lost? What are some of the things that get lost in the story if we myopically focus on these people and instead of seeing the chart in its larger constellation? What are some of the things we're not going to know if we just look at this single nodal point? Tell me.
Like all the different steps it takes to get to one piece of clothing.
Okay, right, so we're going to lose the sense of process, right, like you said earlier. What else might we lose if we lose the fulsomeness of this chart? Where do we generally associate Chanel as having worked or Karl Lagerfeld as having worked? Where are they from? Yeah, France, right? So one thing that we lose here, sorry, there's another one for you. One thing that we lose here is a sense of that this map also represents an incredibly dispersed geographical picture, right? So anyone to venture a guess, it's nice that we have this line just drawn by this screen. Things in the north of the chart tend to happen where? Anyone want to guess? The top of the chart, where do these processes tend to happen? They could happen in the US, or they could happen in France, right? They tend to happen in the wealthy global northern parts of the world. What about, roughly speaking, of course there are exceptions to this, the stuff that's in the lower half of the chart? Where do these things tend to happen? Anyone want to guess? Like, where do we know that most of cut, make, and trim happens?
Developing countries like China.
Sure, right? China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, right? So we can go back to the question and say, when we only focus, right, on this and lose all of this, we also lose a sense of place, right? Anything else that you guys want to talk about what might be lost? Why don't we talk about money for a second, right? For instance, this is a $3 trillion business, right? Where do you think most of the wealth is concentrated in a picture like this? In the top, right? You guys should all come to NYU, the parents included, right? Yeah, so we're looking at an uneven distribution of how the enormous amount of money that's generated by the fashion industry is distributed through this chart. Okay, so can you guys help me think about why we might be incentivized not to think about the chart in the way that we just started to do? Why are we incentivized just to see Chanel or Karl Lagerfeld and to not see other parts of the chart? Yeah.
I feel like, especially with the kind of simple parts, if we think about the technicality that goes into making it, we won't think that it's as beautiful as it is.
Okay, exactly, right? Perfect. Somebody else was going to say something from over here. Yeah.
We have a fascination with individuals when it comes to art.
We have a fascination with individuals when it comes to art. And in some ways, I could ask the same question to you, right? Why do we tend to constellate around this idea of the single creative genius, right? You're saying something really important, which that this chart also represents as if there was an uneven distribution of imagination happening here, right? As if all the imagination or creativity constellates just in the person of the designer. Whereas we know that can't be true because it's connected to what you said about the number of processes here, right? It requires everybody's skill, everybody's imagination in order to do this. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of beautifulness. Why would it take away from the beauty of the object to see this chart in its fuller picture? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right? Is that we could start to think about how part of the way that we can see fashion objects as beautiful, right? Part of the reason we could just study clothes as beautiful objects requires a kind of gigantic act of amnesia, right? A kind of fogging out where we forget about these millions and millions of other people and their creativity, right? And their work and their lives, right, in order to continue to think about this object as beautiful. Okay, so you guys are really, really good students. This is sort of what we do on the first day. And I don't know if you guys sat down and you're like, fashion and globalization, what is she even talking about, right? Because both of those words are words that, like, if I asked you to sit here and define them together, you would kind of be able to come up with a definition, but it would get really tricky really quickly to try to be sort of solid about what we meant. And so over the whole 15 weeks of the class, we're really trying to work to define what these terms might mean. But as you beautifully put it, right, through thinking about this as a holistic process, where it takes the lives and imaginations and contributions and skills of millions and millions of people. So the way that I think about this class is that what we're doing in the 15 weeks is peeling back as many of these dots as we can to see the people who are in some ways hiding or have been hidden underneath them. Okay? All right, that was super quick, but I wanted to take any questions that you guys had or hear any thoughts that you might have. Maybe David is going to